From its inception in 2008 that started with the seemingly inert killer statue SCP-173, to the cryptic and plague-obsessed SCP-049, to the gigantic consciousness-wiping kaiju eel SCP-3000 that resides in the deep ocean depths, and the terrifying hating flesh virus known as SCP-610. The SCP fictional multiverse has grown far and wide to the point that thousands of entries have been created alongside several video games that have you walk down the dark halls of facilities that contain the bizarre, the cute, the beneficial, and sometimes the overwhelmingly dangerous. Secure, contain, and protect. That is the Foundation's motto when it comes to protecting the Earth, humanity, and the universe from entities, objects, locations, and anything in between that may prove to be a danger to all of existence. When it comes to simply ending all life on Earth or overthrowing the rule of mankind, there is no shortage of candidates, and not all SCPs are hostile. But when it comes to finding out which SCPs are the most powerful, unpredictable, and outright unstoppable, we have to dig a bit deeper on that frontier. In this video, I will be analyzing the SCP entries and tales within Series 3, from 2000 to 2999 to be exact, to pin down the entries that I believe are a cut above the rest. The Foundation's classification system has been updated over the years, but there are three main object classes that have been used to distinguish their overall threat level, the ease of containment, predictability, and if they may ultimately serve as mankind's doom or salvation. Safe class SCPs can be contained with little to no trouble due to their well understood behavior, but they can certainly still pose a threat if they were to become activated. Unlike safe SCPs, Euclid class objects are unpredictable and may prove to be more challenging to contain and understand. Most humanoids like SCP-049 and SCP-096 are in this category. While Keter class objects are extremely difficult or outright impossible to contain, this doesn't inherently mean that they are more dangerous than a safe or Euclid level SCP. There are more object classes such as Thaumiel, which are far more secretive and serve to help contain dangerous entities, which may show up in this video. As an important note, just because an SCP has a higher classification level or can blow up more doesn't necessarily mean that it is outright superior to other quote-unquote safer SCPs, as the rankings will also take the following into consideration: their range and rate of destruction, their activation requirements, and most importantly, if they are possible or outright impossible for us to stop. I have already covered Series 1 and 2, which go over the strongest in the first 2,000 entries, so be sure to check those out as well. Now, without further ado, let's go ahead and dive right into this. First on the list is SCP-2006, a reality-warping spherical entity that can transform itself into many shapes and sizes, with the ultimate goal of not killing people, but causing fear and shock in his victims, or its victims. Commonly referred to as the Ro-Man due to its goofy appearance depicting the robot monster from a 1950s film, it is kept in an airtight cell where it is exposed to old and cheesy horror and sci-fi movies in order to make it believe that those concepts and appearances are what truly scare people. Plus, the personnel that interact with SCP-2006 must act as if the entity is truly horrifying in order to further convince it of its scary nature. Despite its motive to scare people, it does not wish to harm anyone, is quite respectful, and it is generally non-lethal. But it is still a Keter-level threat due to its seemingly unlimited potential to change its shape, mass, volume, density, and chemical structure. Yeah, SCP-2006 may act and look silly, which led some personnel into not taking it seriously, but it is still very dangerous, and a site director even mentioned the following to cripple the humor associated with it. It wishes to scare people. Imagine what would happen if SCP-2006 broke containment and found out what really scared people. Imagine if it saw the horror and fear of war, or the concepts of paranoia or phobias common to each and every human being. Imagine if it found the true horror of a nuclear holocaust or an XK class scenario. Now, couple that with an entity that possesses shape-shifting abilities with no known limits, and you'll understand why it is classified as Keter. Within other realities, the SCP Foundation decided to use it with extreme caution to help it catch other SCPs. And they have even mentioned that it could be used as a weapon or as a way to benefit mankind. SCP-106, the old humanoid that can phase through solid objects, leaks acid and takes its prey to a pocket dimension, was subdued by SCP-2006 in such a strong fashion that it resisted its goo, physically overpowered it, and kept it docile long enough to warrant its capture. Although it is stated in the main entry that there is no known way to damage it, within a tale, a pack of SCP-939, the Crimson Predators that can mimic human voices, managed to cause significant trauma to it and knock it out. It has slowly but surely learned more and more about the Foundation, and it has inferred that it is trolling the Foundation by making them believe that they are fooling it and that its containment procedures are effective. Regardless, killing people and causing meaningless destruction seem to be so far removed from its mind because at the end of the day, you cannot scare people, they are dead. The next SCP on the list is a strange twist on the widely popular and late rapper, Tupac Shakur, in the form of SCP-2137, a forensic ghost. Classified as a Thaumiel level SCP due to its resourcefulness and knowledge, it is by far one of the most helpful but highly dangerous SCPs, as it is one of the few entries that managed to outright bully the Foundation into meeting its demands. SCP-2137 is a disc copy of Tupac's 1995 album, Me Against the World, that is pretty fire by the way, that once it plays one of the later tracks, develops into an instance known as SCP-2137-1, which is basically a hip-hop track that snitches on criminals by addressing information and evidence to prosecute them. With the help of this forensic entity, notorious people and organizations were defeated and captured, and dozens of SCP artifacts were also recovered. However, the Foundation eventually decided to stop using it to lessen the potential exposure of their existence, which did not really sit well with the entity because SCP-2137 was aware of this and somehow released an album that exposed information about the Foundation and the entities that they had contained. The album was, for the most part, swept under the rug, and the people who downloaded the works were given amnestics to forget all about the incident. But the damage was already done as the Foundation realized that they couldn't properly negotiate with a being that knew so much about them and could manipulate other SCPs into relaying its information. You could argue that SCP-2137 shouldn't be on a dangerous SCP list due to its, good nature that helped the Foundation bring powerful dictators, tyrants, rogue reality warpers, and murderers to justice. But this SCP is still dangerous because of its potential to lift the veil of secrecy that the Foundation extensively worked to establish. As a result, it could ultimately expose the supernatural, alien, and extra-universal threats that the common person was kept unaware of for decades and bring about worldwide chaos. One of the biggest questions that has pondered the human consciousness for thousands of years is regarding if life and high levels of intelligence exist beyond our green home. During ancient times, a highly advanced Chinese civilization developed a way to message these proposed alien beings to let them know of mankind's existence. So, they crafted SCP-2070, its primary component being a jade and alien alloy box filled with sand that, when symbols are drawn on it, emits tachyons, hypothetical particles that can move faster than the speed of light for the purpose of instantly manipulating galaxies. SCP-2070-1 are elongated galaxies that resemble arrows and have been coined in the astronomical communities as being the fingers of God, while SCP-2070-2 are galaxies that are morphed into symbols or maps that represent humanity, their importance, and the location of our solar system. In order to diminish the true nature of these formations, the Foundation have gone to great lengths to alter and silence these findings within scientific communities, and have spread the idea that these are totally natural formations. Nah, they're not. Due to the cosmological footprints that, have led to us, the Foundation have been debating whether or not to alter historical and astronomical findings by changing the galaxies back to how they were before. Although it is safely kept in a bunker with armed guards, and it was meant for communication, it has two major threat concerns. For one, due to the formations pointing towards the Earth, they could be used by a hostile alien species to track us and eventually subjugate, if not wipe us out altogether, which is not far-fetched because there are numerous SCPs that deal with alien invasions, so go figure. Second, if another organization with malicious intent managed to get a hold of the box and weaponized it, they would be able to instantly destroy galaxies and star systems with ease and bring about universe-wide chaos. The Scarlet King, the Crimson Monarch of the SCP Underworld and arch-nemesis of creation, is without a doubt one of the most popular deities out there, and as such, has several interpretations, tales, and entries dedicated to it. One of them being somewhat tied to SCP-2317, the Armageddon behind a door. SCP-2317's true nature and danger is so secretive that there are multiple entries with false or omitted information in order to maintain a sense of morale amongst the Foundation. It is a door that leads to another reality called SCP-2317-Prime that is covered in salt and has an area with 7 pillars forming into a circle that surrounds and remains above a space that contains SCP-2317-K, the entity known as the Devourer of Worlds. It is a fat humanoid creature estimated to being over 200 kilometers tall, with a horned head and countless armored scales covering its body. According to the mystics that somehow managed to subdue it thousands of years ago, a being called Keshpeth and his army of 10,000 managed to defeat the malevolent god and create chains from the bones of his 7th bride, Jaspitar. Like with the pillars, there are 7 hooks that are embedded in the creature's back and link up to the pillars to keep it imprisoned. Unfortunately, as time passed, 6 of the pillars and chains suffered damage and only one of them remains intact to this day and is the only thing keeping it at bay. In order to make the Foundation employees believe that they have power and control over the creature, the Foundation devised a complete BS ritual, which according to the early entries, must be performed every day without fail to ensure that the entity remains inert. But only the higher-ups, the overseers, know that it is all complete bullshit and that the ritual is only present to alleviate anxiety and ensure the morale of the Foundation. Since the chains were more than likely built from the remains of another entity similar to the demon, and due to the lack of information required to replicate or repair them, there is really nothing the SCP Foundation can do but wait. Despite its reputation as being one of the most dangerous SCPs, it is actually not as powerful as you might think, as the author himself has implied that headshots from current-day artillery would be able to put down the beast. There seems to be a narrative implication that this ancient evil would have been big trouble for like prehistoric humans, but due to the development of nuclear bombs, AC-130s, and other weapons of mass destruction like anime, this god wouldn't be much of a challenge to modern society. Then again, there is no set canon and the destroyer could simply be stronger or weaker depending on the reality, as the world's militaries and even tens of thousands of nuclear bombs blowing up in its face were unable to impede its eradication of all life on Earth. But even in the tales where it did manage to break out and basically win, the Earth was still around and kicking, so, you know, SCP-2317-K on paper is a huge menace. But it is at least something that we can take down or cripple with the modern military, and it can at most defeat mankind but cannot destroy the entire planet in one go, if it even can. Lastly, if it is an avatar of the Scarlet King, one of its minions, which I think is quite likely, or a different being entirely, is honestly up to your interpretation, as there are some connections and differences here and there. But that is something that I'll cover for another day. If you have ever read anything into the SCP universe, you may know about Sarkicism, which is a religion devoted to the concepts of the body, instinct, and flesh. Despite the differences in the SCP canons, the concept of flesh and life are constants that are mostly attributed to Yaldabaoth, the God Eater, who is known by many names and is commonly seen as the former friend, sibling, mate, or rival to Makani, or McCain, the broken god, who is affiliated with technology, wisdom, and the power of the mind. Sarkicism is rooted in ritual sacrifice, cannibalism, how nice, the manipulation of dimensions, the transcendence of the body's natural limitations, and most importantly, in creating pacts with other worldly beings in order to obtain greater power, influence, and the key to immortality. They love disease, corruption, and another way to explain their admiration for the flesh is like if there was this group of people that were really into the Flood from Halo, to the point that they would actively let themselves be infected. So, you know, weird like that. The main figure of worship for the older-fashioned proto-Sarkites that dislike technology is a being known as the Grand Karcist Ion, also known as the Sorcerer King of Adidum, who became one of Yaldabaoth's greatest servants, and was close to achieving godhood by usurping the old goddess. There is a lot of lore and dozens of SCPs that are associated with Sarkicism, one of them being SCP-610, which is that flesh virus. And honestly, a lot of them could fill their own list of, how dangerous they are, but I would like to explore them in depth later on. But the ones that really caught my eye are the Clavigars, or Clavigars, who are the High Priest of the Grand Karcist Ion, one of them being SCP-2191. SCP-2191 is a temple situated in a Romanian forest that is home to modified bat-like humans called SCP-2191-1 that lack most vital organs, are mostly blind, and communicate using clicking sounds, like a bat. In return for their modifications, they age far slower than regular humans and live in a symbiotic relationship with SCP-2191-2 and their variants, which are basically lamprey or eel-like organisms that aid in feeding, preying, and in redistributing nutrients to the living temple itself. Over thousands of years, the vampiric population adapted to hunting humans as their main food source by paralyzing them with numbing agents, and after they would latch onto their necks, they would liquefy their insides akin to how spiders do it with their insect prey. But why and how did these former humans become like this? Starting in the 1930s and continuing over the coming decades, massive earthquakes in Greece, Turkey, and other nearby areas devastated peninsulas and killed tens of thousands of people, thanks to the movement of a giant-ass plant and serpent-like entity, coined as SCP-2191-3, also known as the Clavigar Lavatar, the favorite concubine of the Grand Karcist Ion. After her realm was conquered by Ion's army, the Wizard King took her as his bride and, planted his seed in her, no, like literally, which transformed her into a fleshy plant kaiju, kind of like Biollante, I guess, that became one with the surrounding land. Her core is connected to the temple itself, which is her body basically, and although her true size is unknown, it is estimated by the Foundation that she is over 600,000 kilometers long. And in order to prevent further earthquakes in the region, the local human populations decided to offer sacrifices to calm her hunger, which has proven to be effective, but at the cost of fattening her up and speeding up the process to her eventual rupturing. Although many people have been sacrificed and hunted down over the decades for the well-being and growth of the flesh colony, the SCP Foundation decided that they must let the feeding commence because if the creature is not kept satisfied in its current region, it will want to relocate and kill an even greater number of people due to its seismic activity. So the seemingly obvious procedure in this scenario would be to kill the thing outright, but due to its sheer size, which we still don't know as to what it truly is, the Foundation would likely have to blow up the entire Balkan Peninsula on top of it, which is an area over 500,000 square kilometers that encompasses multiple countries, and even then, it is not a given that it would work. By far, one of the most popular entities in Series 3 is none other than the Deer, a humanoid-faced Servine god, surrounded by spheres and crystals that can morph matter, is indestructible, and likely has connotations to the Roman god, Saturn. The pastel green stag arrived to Earth in a fast-as comet and proved in being one of the largest threats the Foundation had to face, as they had to work in tandem with one of their contemporaries, the Global Occult Coalition. and had to build Site-100 in quick fashion as their military was unable to slow down, much less even put a dent in it. Eventually, they were able to bait the creature to the containment site, where it remains to this day. Like with other SCP gods, the Foundation devised a way to keep the entity at bay using a bizarre ritual that involves a ceremony with people wearing masks, a musical performance, a guy getting his hoo-haws chopped off, ouch, and a person getting roasted, literally for consumption. Which might seem random, but within Roman mythology, Saturn, the counterpart to Kronos, did feed on other gods. Due to the crazy requirements of the ritual, the site director was asked if it was really necessary and if it could be toned down, but he refused to do so as, the ritual was already implemented, and if it was broken, it may prove to bite them in the ass and force SCP-2845 to escape from containment. The thing is, SCP-2845 is not really contained, because if the thought came across it, it could easily vaporize its prison and do as it pleases. But due to the strength and the belief that the ritual works, the Foundation has seemingly fooled it into thinking that they do have power over it. It is unclear if SCP-2845 could say destroy the Earth in one go, or what its upper capabilities are, but in one reality, it was able to fight on par with a black tentacle monster in Dr. Clef's SCP-1, the Flaming Archangel. Even with its blade that rivals the temperature of the sun and can erase things from existence, the stag was unimpeded and kept battling the angel, seemingly to a standstill. So, if the Foundation believes that the entity is completely resistant to physical damage, it is likely that a lot of nuclear weaponry, or the gigatons of energy that would be required to destroy the Balkan Peninsula, would be nothing to the stag. The Black Knight satellite is an anomalous object that was discovered in 1998 by NASA, and conveniently I couldn't really find information on it, cover up, and has been thought of as being of extraterrestrial origin or random space junk. But it was eventually deduced by the Foundation that it likely came into fruition as a result of a gravitational anomaly located within the Earth's atmosphere known as SCP-2460. This area of dark matter blocks virtually all forms of electromagnetic radiation, charges, and allows objects to occupy the same space due to its middle finger to the Pauli exclusion principle, which states that no two electrons in an atom can have the same quantum spin or direction in an orbital. You can't have two positive or two negative spins in one orbital because they must face the opposite direction. Basically, SCP-2460 allows solid matter to come together as a result of lacking interference and repulsion between electrons, which prevents us from phasing through walls and other solid objects in the first place. Another way to look at it is that it basically produces a similar effect to collision glitches in video games, where objects and characters can become jumbled together or phase through each other. A very low level of photons, which are light particles in the visual spectrum, are able to interact with the Black Knight object, allowing humans to perceive a fraction of it. Okay, but what is so dangerous about it, and why is it Keter? Due to its density rivaling that of a white dwarf star, that being 550 million kilograms per cubic meter, it would prove fatal to the Earth if it collided with it, as it would radically affect its matter, create a hole, and eventually collapse and morph the entire planet into itself. Because of its properties, we cannot touch, destroy, or simply push it somewhere else, and the only thing that can seemingly work against it is gravity. A researcher proposed that a possible solution was to slingshot the anomaly using another object with similar mass, like an asteroid, and then destroy the massive rock right afterwards. It is unclear as to how this patch of dark matter ended up on the Earth of all places, and as long as its orbit remains stable, it doesn't pose a threat for now. But the effort of getting rid of it would be quite taxing to say the least. By the way, there are more complex physics behind this SCP that I did not cover here for time and simplicity's sake, but if you have the time, I would highly recommend checking it out because it was very fun to research. The Infinity Gauntlet is by far one of the most powerful weapons in the Marvel Universe that allowed Thanos to control several aspects of reality. And within the SCP universe, they have their own massively powerful gauntlet of Russian origin known as SCP-2501, which was created through unknown means and its power source is also cloaked in mystery. It is classified as safe due to being kept under the supervision of armed guards at all times, and even if someone did get a hold of it, they would have to bypass security protocols and use specialized keycards to use it. Despite its worn-out look, it works as long as a human hand holds it and applies pressure, which in turn can crush a solid object within the person's line of sight. SCP-2501's entry notes that the distance from the object, its density or size, don't seem to affect the capability of the gauntlet. Soup cans, cars, and tanks were all casually flattened by the contraption, and at one point, the Foundation wanted to test it out on a massive asteroid, but later were like, that's probably not a good idea. But how did the Foundation come into possession of this object? Well, a woman from the cryptic company that sells bizarre items to the rich, Marshall, Carter, and Dark, gave it to the Foundation for safekeeping as she believed that it was way too dangerous to be put into the wrong hands. Why? Well, the item is possibly capable of crushing important landmarks, countries, planets, and even stars. This could be taken as hyperbole, but I mean, this did come from one of the creators of the object, and a tale does back up the narrative as a rogue organization managed to get a hold of the gauntlet with the objective to crush the Earth, but this ultimately failed as the gauntlet can be cancelled out by other items within its set. Its upper limits have not been showcased, but if this object is truly capable of crushing celestial objects, it is certainly a worthy contender. Like with the Sarkites and their devotion to their fleshy gods, the members of the Church of the Broken God also wanted to please their deity, Mekani, as they tried to revive his completed form from his shattered remains. Although the vast majority of its components came from numerous SCP artifacts that were originally a part of Mekani's earthly avatar, its heart equivalent was nowhere to be found, so the church decided to commission their own. So, they came to the sketchy organization known as the Factory to create it, which gave birth to a being that was hell-bent on absorbing everything around it and grow into a mountain of metal. This abomination that was not truly Mekani wreaked havoc upon the Earth to the point that the next SCP on our list came to the rescue. The massive alien superstructure called SCP-2399, the malfunctioning destroyer and one of DJ Cactus's coolest entries. SCP-2399 was first seen in 1665 as it crash landed on Jupiter after striking Io, one of Jupiter's moons. Then, it became trapped by its immense gravitational pull, and in attempts to escape, it bombarded the hell out of the gas giant with high-grade weaponry to the point that it created the Great Red Spot on its surface, which is a storm wider than the Earth itself with wind speeds far superior to the hurricanes on Earth. It is equipped with high-grade electromagnetic shielding, a limitless supply of energy, and extremely precise tracking systems. As a result of its crash landing, it was left in a damaged state, but with the help of its drones, the super weapon has so far reached nearly 60% of its full capacity, and over the decades, it has beamed out transmissions to another galaxy millions of light years away. In response, the Foundation set up satellites that jammed SCP-2399 signals and tried to hinder its progress by wiping out its drones, but the massive structure eventually caught on and thwarted their efforts time and time again. With the objective to protect the Earth, the SCP Foundation elites alongside dozens of nations formulated an extensive and expensive-ass plan called Protocol Legionnaire, which deals with the objective to create a massive electromagnetic pulse to fry its systems and launch a ton of nuclear warheads that would destroy our civilization thousands of times over. But would that really work? I mean, due to its advanced nature and durability, it is unlikely that it would work. Plus, a story depicted that the plan would likely end in failure as scorch marks from thousands of nuclear bombs were unable to put down the ancient alien machine. And even if it were to work, the SCP Foundation at this time has no clue how they would deliver a pulse that massive, much less how to power it. We don't really know as to why the structure came to our star system of all places, but a possible reason is that it was originally meant to land on the Earth to eradicate Director Cactus's SCP-1 proposal, which is the aforementioned aberration that was given life in late 1942 near La Paz, Mexico. During its rampage, the mind-controlling machine had consumed countless towns, people, and eventually ate a solid chunk from Baja California, which forced the Foundation to use an anomalous object to slow down its progress while they thought of a way to defeat it, but in all honesty, they had no chance in hell. Luckily, with its massively powerful beam of light, SCP-2399 arrived to the scene and managed to heavily damage and split the false god apart, leaving most of its components intact that were later recontained by the Foundation. Due to the Titan's rampage and its alteration of the Mexican landscape, the Foundation changed the maps to fit the narrative and spread amnestics to the local populations in order to make them believe that all of this was made up or that nothing happened at all. Since SCP-2399 departed to Jupiter shortly after its defeat of SCP-1, it seems unlikely that it was sent out to wipe out the Earth or mankind itself because, I think it would have done it then and there. But we can't really know for sure. It has been theorized by the Foundation that SCP-2399 had fought the entity numerous times in the past and that it was the cause for its damage. I also believe that it is possible that SCP-2399 is itself a component of SCP-1 or McCain's lowly avatar. But since it sensed that, this aberration was not truly McCain, it was like, nah, I gotta take it out. Yeah, SCP-2501, the Gauntlet, can possibly destroy larger celestial bodies like stars, but I believe that overall, SCP-2399 is more dangerous due to the massive amount of energy and power that would be required to cripple it, if we even can, and because it was able to put down the false broken god. Mankind's study and obsession with finding life beyond our galaxy eventually came to bite us in the ass due to the next extraterrestrial SCPs on our list. SCP-2669 was a project launched by the Foundation in order to detect Earth-like planets and to establish the threat levels of aliens beyond the stars. The probe known as Keftul-1 was completed and sent into orbit in 2004 with two very high-grade components procured from the study of other SCPs, one of them which is on this list. One being its ability to travel over 5 times faster than the speed of light as a result of locally distorting spacetime, because that makes sense. The other being its communications array, allowing for instantaneous transmission as a result of linking a human's consciousness within the ship's computer to their corporeal body on Earth. At first, a person who was part of the project volunteered, but they essentially became a slave as they were forced to explore the vastness of space without an end in sight. After the probe documented over 100 planets and traveled thousands of light years with no results, the host eventually grew tired of their mission, became lonely, and at one point told the Foundation, hey, pull the plug on me, I don't want to keep going. But since the Foundation don't really care and they prioritize exploration, they force the probe to keep going on its mission. So this pushed the host to take full control of the ship and plot a course to the Earth. The problem is, due to its far faster than light capabilities, if it were to haul ass to the Earth, it would collide with it in such a dominant fashion that it would shatter the entire planet, as a result of the ship's course generating so much energy that it would overcome the Earth's gravitational binding energy, which is basically the energy that holds planets and stars together. To prevent this, the Foundation started uploading more people into the ship's mainframe in attempts of overriding the host's control, which somewhat delayed the ship's trajectory, but the main host eventually caught on and eventually absorbed them into itself, becoming more intelligent, dangerous, and accurate in the process. But despite their efforts, the ship is still headed to Earth with the attempt to wipe out the host's long and lonesome torment. Imagine that the Earth itself was an anomalous object that had to be monitored by an alien organization that likely operates on a galactic scale. That is what the next SCP entails. SCP-2631 designates 4 satellite-like black spheres that orbit the Earth, monitor the entire solar system, and relay the status of our home and its danger level to its creators, and if need be, are prepared to wipe us out in overkill fashion. In 1987, neutrino detectors discovered massive energy signatures coming from supernova 1987A, a real event by the way. But a few hours right before that, the Foundation detected a neutrino flux coming from one of the satellites, which could possibly mean that these spheres can cause supernovas to occur. Supernovas are exploding stars more massive than our own sun, and even just the average one can exert over 10 to the 44th power of joules, or over 100 tredecillion joules of energy, which is about the same range of energy that our sun would make within 10 billion years. According to NASA, SN 1987A, the supernova I mentioned earlier, released the energy of over 100 million suns within a few months and likely released more energy than the average supernova. When a dangerous SCP broke out of containment, the spheres launched hundreds of capsules into the Earth's atmosphere that likely served as failsafes or chemical beacons to lead a relativistic object towards the Earth, and, like in similar if not logically superior fashion to SCP-2669, such an impact would have demolished the Earth from existence. Luckily, after the SCP in question was recontained, the satellite sent out another signal, and within a few hours, the fast object changed its course. Despite the massive power and influence that these spheres have, the Foundation foolishly think that they could stop the Doomsday devices by colliding and destroying them with nuclear weapons, which would very likely not work at all, and like with SCP-2317, the plan is more than likely just there to make humanity think that they might have a chance. In fact, the danger from this SCP is so significant that the Foundation would have to go as far as releasing other SCPs, likely to get mankind's eradication over and done with, before the alien object would even get to the Earth. We don't know what the beings that made these devices are called, where they are, or what their motives are, but they refer to humans as music makers, and we seem to be part of an experiment for them. But as long as the Foundation keeps these dangerous anomalies under a lock and key, the satellites won't really have a reason to send these battering rams after us. Regardless, due to the fact that these aliens can induce supernovas, make them very lethal and sus as fuck. Imagination and the capabilities of the human mind can be a very powerful thing, but what if there was a being who could use their imagination to such a wide extent that entire concepts would cease to exist? Enter SCP-2470, the Void Singularity and State of Unbeing, which honestly gave me a mind. SCP-2470 is a telepathic Keter-class entity with the potential to create a ZK-class scenario. In other words, it can threaten the Earth, the Milky Way galaxy, and our entire reality. It is able to sense radiation and mechanical stimuli to a wide extent, and most notably, it can erase the existence of objects, concepts, and events if it were to perceive them. Lucky for us, its limited understanding of objects being able to be contained within groups, or those groups being part of a greater group or a concept, made its capture possible after multiple failed attempts. Its origin is unknown, but it is implied to have been a reality warper that apprehended the idea of non-existence without ceasing to exist altogether, if that makes sense. It is also connected to a doomsday cult that believe the being represents the apocalypse and end of humanity. SCP-2470 was first detected nearby a forest and was initially thought to be a miniature black hole. But once the Foundation came into the fray, they realized that they were not dealing with just the ordinary reality warper, as it turned out to be something far more complex and much, much worse. When SCP agents came to the scene, they used smoke grenades to conceal their location, and as the entity observed the smoke in the area, it made it disappear alongside the sound of their footsteps. Once it perceived that the sound of the footsteps came from their feet, it made their legs and their entire body cease to exist right after. Curiously, since it made the local smoke grenades disappear, its reality warping applied to an entire site and made all of the existing smoke grenades in the area to also disappear. But since it didn't erase the concept of smoke or grenades as a whole on a wider scale, they remained in existence throughout the world, meaning that its effects are dependent on the range that it perceives. For example, if it perceived a bottle of water and deduced that, hey, there is more water outside of this that exists somewhere else, it could erase this concept. Then if it deduced that, hey, this water is composed of hydrogen and oxygen atoms, and then realized that virtually everything is composed of atoms, and realized that this existed on a universal scale, it could make those elements cease to exist as well. And for that exact reason, the SCP Foundation has to ensure that the being remains ignorant of larger concepts, such as time, space, and other vital building blocks of reality. It is because of this lack of knowledge and generalization that it hasn't perceived the Earth or the universe as a limited, singular entity, which is why it hasn't perceived it and wiped it out, at least yet. SCP-2470 is located in a heavily armored and layered site called Area 141, where it is kept at bay through the use of specialized containment methods, telepathy blocking materials, and airlocks. For one, due to its heightened perception of radiation, its area is surrounded by Faraday cages, real-world objects of course, that block electromagnetic fields coming from the outside. Of course, any well-secured containment cell has to have a powerful electrical system and backups if need be. But just in case the generators and even the backup ones were to fail, luminophores, which are like those glow sticks that you may have seen, act as another defensive layer. When activated, these items highlight a special image founded on the idea of a paradox that would hypothetically make SCP-2470 incapable of perceiving sound, smell, sight, or other general senses. This paradox is known as, excuse me if I butchered it, Weisse-Schaden paradox, which honestly took me a while to wrap my head around. Its termination procedure entails that two telepathic agents are to perceive the paradox in one subcomponent, or half of the paradox if you will. Then they would come into contact telepathically with SCP-2470, implant each half of the paradox within it, and basically aim it to confuse it into erasing itself. Unfortunately, the entity can somehow prevent the effects of the paradox because, as said in its entry, the effect of quantum entanglement of the object in present time with itself in an immediate future allows it to foresee the damaging effect of the memetic agent without even having a concept of its nature. And even when a mirror was placed in front of it with a theory that, hey, it would perceive and erase itself, it remained intact, unlike the objects that were reflected in the mirror, which led the SCP personnel to hypothesize that the entity cannot perceive itself, refuses to, is immune to its effects, or it is unable to be recognized altogether. Overall, the paradox works as a containment procedure that tricks SCP-2470 into not being able to erase its containment area, because doing so would force it to perceive the symbols linked to the paradox, which it actively avoids because it doesn't want to be erased, or lose its perception. So yeah, that was a lot to unwrap, and I understand if you are still confused, as am I. So I would definitely recommend reading through it yourself, but basically, this thing can wipe out reality if it was to perceive it as a whole. Spaceships are by far one of the most popular technological breakthroughs that allowed mankind to set foot on the moon, and if we don't end up nuking ourselves out of existence, we might be able to even reach further horizons with better, faster, and stronger spaceships. In fact, the aforementioned SCP-2669, which was used to map out the stars, was constructed using technology from this SCP. Enter SCP-2117, the SCPS Solidarity, a Thaumiel-level SCP, which represents the technological prowess that encompasses multiple realities, due to its highly complex and transcendental elements. On the outside, it looks like a ship that is tens to hundreds of kilometers long, but due to the station not being limited by the rules of Euclidean geometry, its internal dimensions are much larger. Like with SCP-2460, that gravitational anomaly, the ship also violates the Pauli exclusion principle, which prevents objects from occupying the same space at the same time with the same energy level. It can communicate across realities, can replenish and repair itself, and it can even create antimatter, among many other things. There are an unknown number of these ships throughout the multiverse, but one of them is kept in the orbit of Saturn's largest moon and Thanos' birthplace, Titan. So the integrity of space-time and the law of relativity, do these rules hinder the Solidarity? Nah, because it can travel massively faster than the speed of light, can cross the boundaries between universes, and it can outright propel itself even with the absence and folding of space-time. In the battle against an evil overseer, which are basically like the higher-ups in the SCP Foundation, and no, I'm not memeing here, the Catgirl crew of the Solidarity showcase its true qualities as it was able to surpass its engine's limitations many times over, outrun the expansion of a Big Bang, and endure the explosion even before its durability was amplified. The Death Star from Star Wars is pretty impressive for its capability to wipe out planets with ease, but the Solidarity makes it look like a joke, as it has plasma cannons, moon-cracking slugs, to singularities that can spaghettify people, and its most powerful weapon is called the Grand Wave Motion Projection Cannon, which was able to kill the Overseer that survived the folding of space-time, its weaponized black holes, and even the Big Bang itself at point-blank range. So basically, this ship has the firepower that is beyond universe level. Now, why is this station labeled as a Thaumiel level SCP? Well, Thaumiels are SCPs that can be used to contain and counter Keter level threats and beyond, such as SCP-2399 and SCP-2669. Although it is more of a beneficial SCP, if someone with malicious intentions were to get a hold of one, they could certainly cause a lot of havoc throughout the multiverse. If you recall back to my Series 1 video, I went over one of the most dangerous SCPs being SCP-319, a strange, clock-like device with a dead vacuum that will eventually break out, despite our efforts, expand at the speed of light, and annihilate virtually everything in the universe that does not correspond to its vastly different physical properties. The next SCP on the list is quite similar and was constructed by none other than one of the fathers of electrical technology, Nikola Tesla, the Serbian-American scientist from the early 20th century. In real life, he developed the alternating current electric system and worked extensively on the goal of offering free and clean electricity to the people, but of course, that didn't make money and the capitalist industries saw it as a threat to their growing empire. Regardless, Tesla continued working on bigger and better things until a greater conflict would rattle the entire world. During the 1940s, the heavy turmoil and chaos from the Second World War worried the United States and other nations about the possibility of enemy invasions. But Tesla reported that he had conceptualized a particle beam weapon, known today as the Death Ray or Teleforce, which would have fired accelerated slugs at its targets from a massive distance away and would have revolutionized warfare forever. According to official records, after Nikola Tesla died in 1943, the United States government ceased his work and said that they did not find any solid evidence resembling the supposed weapon. But hey, I wouldn't be surprised if they did find some high-level that they swept under the rug and kept off the record. Haha, if I get sniped, you probably know why. However, within the SCP universe, Nikola Tesla not only managed to expand on his concepts, but create something more dangerous entirely. At some point in his life, the secluded mastermind eventually came into contact with humanoids from other realities that were impressed by his big brain status and formality. This council of curious minds from the multiverse came together to discover what they deemed the final scientific secret, an infinite power generator. So, Tesla decided to bring his Teleforce prototype with him in attempts to fix the roadblocks that he encountered with the project. Thanks to their help and cryptic materials, Tesla's device was completed at last and everything seemed fine until he realized that one of them that was acting very sus had sabotaged his device and had essentially turned the Teleforce into a ticking time bomb that would sooner or later collapse reality as he knew it. However, the person who helped him didn't really sabotage it, as they merely finalized what Tesla ultimately wanted to create in the first place, a weapon, now known as SCP-2700, which of course, Tesla had to take back with him. SCP-2700 is a Keter-level SCP that is heavily guarded and kept under constant surveillance in a bunker. It is composed of three main parts: a computer interface with a keyboard, a particle accelerator to power it, and a core containing a self-sustaining vacuum that works in opposite fashion to the rest of the universe, known as SCP-2700-Omega, which deals with entropy and is set to arm within 200 years. Okay, what is entropy? Well, it is basically the degree of disorder or variability in a closed system. The more variability and disorder a system has, the more entropy it would have than a smaller system with less variability. If a system has more molecules and more possibilities of where those molecules could go or form into, the more entropy it would have. According to the second law of thermodynamics, our universe is constantly gaining more and more entropy, or moving towards a state of more disorder or maximum entropy. So if our universe is continuously expanding, it is becoming a larger system with more possible configurations. But as a stark contrast, SCP-2700-Omega exhibits infinitely converging energy that goes from a state of maximum entropy to one of minimal entropy, meaning that it is moving towards a smaller state with less variability and more order, which is likely the cause for the reversed flow of time within the space as well. This is really dangerous because if the vacuum were to break out of its containment area, it would cause a massive chain reaction in the universe coined a YK class entropic annihilation event, which would flip its entropic levels and transform the cosmos into an inverse Big Bang. So it would basically force the universe to prestige and lose all of its progress to reverse its expansion. And that is not even the worst part, because trying to disassemble it would likely only quicken the process. Luckily, the Foundation have a lot of time to figure out a solution, and there are several pocket dimensions and uninhabited universes that they could simply dump it into. You know, it's not our problem. Another possible salvation is rooted in SCP-2400, which if you have watched Dragon Ball Z, it is basically like a hyperbolic time chamber type of room with a different flow of time and seemingly infinite space. Because of this secluded nature, as long as a dimensional door remains closed, energy nor matter from the outside would be able to cross over. So the Foundation have thought about creating a device from Tesla's work that would theoretically neutralize the entropic levels within SCP-2700 and in effect deactivate it. But the margin of error is too small and unforgiving that one wrong move would spell GG to the universe. Next on the list is yet another bubble of death that is unfortunately right next door to us on the moon, in the form of a spatial anomaly known as SCP-2821, a sphere with no fixed size, as it can expand and retract at the speed of light at any given time. Because of its vastly different properties to the rest of the universe, it has been theorized by the Foundation that it is a true vacuum, a region of space at the absolute lowest energy level, which as a contrast, our universe is a metastable or mostly stable false vacuum with higher energy levels. Back to thermodynamics, according to the third law, a system will eventually move to a constant lower energy level as a result of temperature trying to reach absolute zero as close as possible, a state in which molecules cease to have motion. Now it might sound like I'm just spouting random but this SCP actually has a good deal of science behind it, especially since it has to do a lot with the quantum field theory, so bear with me. This theory notes that our universe is layered with multiple energy fields that are responsible for the existence and interactions between electrons, photons, which are light particles, quarks, which help form the nuclei of atoms, and the Higgs boson, whose field, called the Higgs field, is responsible for giving some of these particles their mass as they pass through it. Although the Higgs field is basically like glue that helps hold our reality together, it is not as stable as the others, which has worried scientists about a scenario called vacuum decay. Through a phenomenon called quantum tunneling, if a particle from the Higgs field were to cross into a super dense area or lower energy level, it could lead the entire Higgs field into it and collapse the universe as we know it. A good example I saw is that you could think of our universe as being a valley that is surrounded by several mountains. To us, the valley would appear as the absolute lowest area, but on the other side of the mountains would be the sea, which goes even deeper. In a vacuum decay scenario, the sea would flood the valley and basically bring everything down to its own level. Or hell, to make it even easier, hopefully, picture Goku's Ultra Instinct state as being a false vacuum, and by powering down or lowering his energy levels, he can revert back to base form, which we'll say is a true vacuum. Therefore, if SCP-2821 broke out, It would serve to destabilize reality by preventing particles from properly forming, which would mean that physics and chemistry and all of these studies, all of these theories that we have developed around it and how our universe works, would not work. Because it would expand at the speed of light, our Earth and the Moon would go bye-bye pretty much instantly, followed by the majority of our star system within 6 hours, and it would eventually destroy everything in the universe within billions of years, assuming its rate is constant. Lucky or unlucky for us, residing in the bubble is a colorful entity with tentacles or tendrils that may be the cause of the anomaly, is imprisoned within it, or is actively the thing preventing the vacuum from expanding towards the Earth, like a failsafe basically. Its origin is unknown, but it is theorized that it is either a pattern screamer, which is a group of beings within the SCP mythos that basically consume concepts, or this being could also be affiliated with the Church of the Second High-Toth, a religious alien group that strive to help our world from other dimensional consumers of reality, with one of their weapons being SCP-1548, our sun, which I covered in depth in my Series 2 video. It might be slow in destroying our reality in comparison to other SCPs, but I believe its danger level is still quite significant because unlike with SCP-2700, there doesn't seem to be a way for us to directly stop this from expanding, as it is more than likely dependent on the entity encased within it, which we still don't know if it is a friend or a foe. Thus far, we have covered skips that can threaten the universe, but what about those that can endanger a multiverse, exist as ideas, or that can kill virtually anything regardless of their nature? That is exactly where we are heading, and first up is SCP-2207, a plastic knife that can destabilize the fabric of reality and is deemed a safe class. Safe class, does that mean that it is a scrub lord? Well, not at all. It is only denoted as safe because its behavior is predictable and since it has been stored away safely in a locker. And remember, an SCP's class doesn't always correlate or have any relevance to its destructive capacity, as it is mostly dependent on its behavior or how difficult it is to contain. In similar fashion to the dimensional portals the Espada faction from Bleach could use by basically slashing their Zompok toes, SCP-2207 can create a rift to another universe by severing space-time. Through testing with the object, the Foundation discovered multiple different universes, some twisted and dark beyond recognition, as some planets within these universes had withering life, a seemingly perpetual solar eclipse, and cities with people that were turned into puddles, among many other things. Over 100 realities were explored and documented using this SCP until a higher order of beings from the Office of Multiversal Incidents stepped in and basically told the Foundation to stop at once. Why? Well, because of their tests with the Blade, the Foundation had unknowingly caused all of these universes to go through bizarre changes, become cut off from the multiverse, and in some cases, cease to exist altogether. Something the Council called Yggdrasil severance events, which could basically imply that the Norse gods and their cosmology also exist within the SCP mythos. Luckily, the beings gave them a benefit of the doubt and ruled that their actions weren't out of malice and that they didn't really know what they were doing. But if they didn't stop testing at once, they would do even worse things to their universe than what they did by testing this blade. And because of this, the Foundation was basically bullied into never using it again. Now, regarding its placement, I was debating if it would be appropriate to have it this high up among the other ones that can also wipe out realities. Because at the end of the day, we can prevent it and we know how it works because as long as no one uses it, we are good to go. But since it had negative repercussions on the multiverse and its structure to the point that this office was like, yo, you need to stop using this right now, you're f***ing up reality, and since it was able to wipe out over 100 realities in a short period of time, I concluded that its rate and range of destruction was superior to the other ones on this list and would justify a higher ranking. Death is a powerful concept in the multiverse that humans, stars, universes, multiverses, and even gods have to face at one point or another. One such manifestation of this is SCP-2935, a Keter-level SCP with overwhelming influence, range, and nearly instantaneous effects across time and space. SCP-2935 is a portal to another universe, located within a cave, and it is likely situated in the same spot across every reality. Because of its highly detrimental effects, it has been sealed away, and seemingly doesn't pose a threat as long as nobody, comes across it. But why was it sealed in the first place? Upon exploring this other reality and its SCP facilities, the agents found out that virtually everything had died off in this universe, as people, animals, spirits, and even the bacteria responsible for decay were nowhere to be found. Even more shocking is that SCP-173, the iconic concrete statue, the computer AI SCP-079, and the seemingly immortal crocodile SCP-682 were found lifeless and destroyed. Which is very significant because if you know anything about SCP-682, it is a reptile-like being whose whole gimmick is to adapt and overcome to whatever tried to kill it in the first place. And it does live up to its nature because blasting it with bombs, banishing it to another dimension, reality warping it, placing it into a void of nothingness with the idea that it would not exist anymore, and even the existence erasing sword from SCP-1, the Angel, failed to put it down for good, among many, many other things that failed. Apart from the statue SCP-173, SCP-2935 managed to do the near impossible and put this lizard to sleep permanently. It is unknown if this widespread death affected beings such as SCP-239, a very powerful reality warper, SCP-2317, the Doomsday Demon behind the door, or SCP-3000, the consciousness-wiping kaiju eel from Series 4. But according to the author, who also wrote SCP-3000 and SCP-2399, he stated that this force affected everything in that reality, including ideas and higher dimensional beings, such as SCP-2634, a native of the 6th spatial dimension. So going by that, it is very likely that its range is very, very high and likely affected those other beings as well. By virtue of being a form of death that can affect higher dimensional forms of life pretty much instantly, it easily ranks above many other SCPs that we have covered thus far. However, the thing that keeps it from its number one spot is that its spread and effect depends on someone having to cross over or going through the cave and bringing the effect back with them to their own reality. So if no one can access this death portal, then we are pretty much okay and we don't really have to worry about this. And I guess you could also think of it kind of like an infinity gauntlet. Very powerful, can affect very powerful beings, but it doesn't really work or is very ineffective outside of its home reality. Outside of pataphysics, narrative eaters, and other overpowered entities, nearing the end of Series 3 is the SCP which I believe to be the most dangerous overall, due to its transcendent nature and ability to usurp not only the entire Foundation, but their most powerful captives as well. That is of course SCP-2998, a massively powerful info hazard that transcends 4th dimensional space. An info hazard being an object with an effect that is triggered whenever you see it, refer to it, or describe it. Like SCP-2317 and other SCPs on the list, SCP-2998's file has multiple iterations that omits or includes information, but why? Well, at first SCP-2998 was thought to be nothing more than a universe-wide signal that the Foundation picked up on and tried to analyze. And as they did so, they found a message which showcased an alien entity floating in distress as it was being punished. And the leader of the aliens, who had beef with the said prisoner, wanted to broadcast this punishment across the cosmos to spread fear into whoever tried to challenge it. Naturally, of course, the SCP Foundation wanted to dig deeper, which was not a good idea. So people with specific brain structures and conditions that would make them more susceptible to these info hazards were exposed to the signal in attempts to, dig up more information on it. But they started behaving strangely and muttered the words of the alien boss known as Adidal and the captive in question called Ruhar, who was imprisoned for killing Adidal's family. As more and more people became exposed to the signal, Ruhar was able to take control of them and escaped its prison through transferring itself within mankind, which would spell disaster for the Earth, as the leader's new objective was to find and kill Ruhar, and not just their body or spirit, but their idea as well. You see, within their culture, or what would seem like a culture to us, these aliens aim to destroy the idea of something or someone as the highest form of punishment, in a way that transcends our laws of time and space. Since the idea of Ruhar's existence became linked to our own existence, it pushed the alien leader to invade the Earth, because if the humans fell, so would Ruhar. Once the alien leader and its armada invaded the Earth, likely in their lower dimensional forms like some dark side type, they made short work of Earth's defenses, mind-controlled most of mankind, took over their database, and neutralized their most powerful and dangerous SCPs. However, what little was left of mankind was able to come up with a plan to combine two SCPs in order to basically reset the universe to a point before they accessed the signal, which made everything go back to normal and the aliens seem to have pissed off. Now, why and how is this number 1 if it may sound like a cliched alien invasion plot? Well, that is because the nature of these aliens give rise to an element that I have not expanded on yet. You see, they aren't typical aliens that share the same universe and abide to the same physics as you and I, nor are they simply higher dimensional beings. They are living ideas. Ideas being something that is not really tangible or that can be fully understood or killed. And even all-powerful gods are still bound to ideas or are depicted through them or a concept in one way or another. Think about it, even the terrible and gigantic SCP-2317 is bound by 7 chains and has a significant connection to the number or the idea of 7. Plus, the nearly indestructible stag SCP-2845 is held captive through the power of belief in the idea that these rituals and numbers hold dominion over them. The beings depicted in SCP-2998 might have been stopped by the laws of time or some higher scale reality reset, but they represent the potential heights a civilization may reach, and even then, they are nothing to even stronger ideas and fundamentals that hold power over most, if not all gods, in the SCP multiverse. What I'm trying to get at here is that beings like the Scarlet King, SCP-343, and other crazy powerful entities might be really big dogs, but they may not be at the top of the food chain after all, which I will certainly cover more in depth as we go through Series 4 and beyond, which includes entries that can transcend an infinite stack of narratives infinitely, can consume narratives entirely, or are ideas that can consume other ideas and gods. So, what'd you think of the list and, my rankings? Are there any SCPs within Series 3 that you think I should have mentioned? Please let me know, and I really hope that you guys enjoyed the video. I would like to give a huge thanks to SCP Animated and Tat's Top Videos for allowing me to use their animations. And I would highly recommend checking out all of the artists in the description below, because if it wasn't for them, the SCP universe wouldn't be as lively. Thanks so much for watching, please subscribe to the channel, and I will catch you thotties next time. Peace out.